No one wanted the scarred dog lying in the auction mud until a former Navy vet, broken by her own past, whispered, "I'll take him." What followed shook an entire city. Hidden military secrets, dogs erased like mistakes, and a woman who refused to let one soul be forgotten. But what happens when the one you save turns out to be the key to everything they tried to bury? The sky over Portland hung heavy and low, cloaked in a mist that bled into everything. The trees, the rooftops, the breath of the people walking home with collars turned up. The rain hadn't stopped in 2 days, and now it fell in sheets, cold and unapologetic, soaking through coats and leaking through the corroded roof of an old warehouse just outside the industrial district. The warehouse, a forgotten skeleton of steel and rust, served today as the county's auction house. Inside, the sharp smell of wet concrete mixed with mold and old oil. The crowd was sparse, mostly men in worn jackets, shoulders hunched, boots thick with mud, their eyes scanning for tools, surplus gear, or a generator they could resell. Toward the far end of the warehouse, lit dimly by flickering fluorescent lights, lay a golden retriever. The dog, around 4 years old, was barely recognizable beneath the grime and tangle of his once glorious golden coat. His fur was mottled with patches of dried mud, his ribs sharp against his skin, and a long, raised scar traced a cruel path from beneath his left ear to the base of his neck. He didn't lift his head when people passed. He didn't flinch when someone laughed too loud. He simply stared forward, eyes glassy and tired, like a creature who had already surrendered to silence. A man in the second row smirked and elbowed his friend. "Looks like something you'd find in a ditch." "Should have been put down already," another muttered. Standing behind a dented podium was Carl Bowers, the auctioneer, a man in his early 60s with a ruddy face, sagging jowls, and an ever-present pair of suspenders that did little to keep his pants from sliding. His voice, thick from years of cigars and bourbon, echoed awkwardly across the hollow space. "Final lot of the day, folks. Male golden retriever. No records, no tag. Labeled aggressive. Final auction before he's transferred to animal control." He hesitated, glancing down at the dog, then forced a smile. "Let's start the bidding at $50. Silence. The dog didn't move. A drop of water fell from the leaking ceiling and landed near his paw. He didn't even twitch. Carl cleared his throat. "Anyone? $50? Still nothing. Just as he raised the gavel for the final call, a chair scraped back near the back of the room. A woman stepped forward, soaked from the rain, her boots trailing puddles behind her. Rosalind Hart, 27, stood with the kind of stillness that made people turn and look without knowing why. She was lean, almost boyish in build, with sharp cheekbones, deep-set eyes the color of lake water, and a tired grace that made her seem older than her years. Her black hair was pulled into a careless knot at the base of her neck, strands plastered to her face from the rain. She wore a navy blue army coat, the hem frayed, the insignia nearly worn off. The way she walked, calm, methodical, spoke of years spent marching down metal ship corridors and sleeping under foreign skies. Rosalind had served 4 years in the Navy, most of them aboard a supply ship in the Arabian Gulf. Her final year ended abruptly after a roadside blast during a joint humanitarian mission. Since then, she had drifted quietly back into civilian life, renting a one-room house near the Willamette River, shaping clay into pottery by day and fighting sleeplessness by night. She rarely went out, rarely spoke unless necessary, but now her voice cut clean through the murmurs. "I'll take him." Carl blinked. "Sorry?" She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a damp wad of bills. $50, she repeated. A few men chuckled under their breath, amused or puzzled, but no one said anything else. Carl gave a half shrug and scribbled on the form. "He's yours then. No returns, no guarantees. You'll need to sign the liability waiver." Rosalind scrawled her name without reading it. A worker handed her a frayed rope leash, but she didn't take it. Instead, she crouched down about 3 feet from the dog and studied him. His ears were low but alert, and though his body didn't move, she saw the shallow rise and fall of his chest, quickened by her presence. She didn't speak at first. Then, very quietly, she said, "You're not staying here. Not anymore." He didn't look at her, but when she rose and stepped back, he lifted his head, just slightly, and blinked once. It took 20 minutes to get him into her truck. not by pulling or dragging, but by patience. She sat on the wet floor of the loading dock, letting him see her, smell her, and finally, after long moments of nothing, follow her. The drive back to her home was slow, the windshield wipers beating a rhythm against the deluge. Rosalind glanced in the rearview mirror often. The dog sat in the back seat, unmoving, his head lowered between his front paws. He had no collar, no chip, no name. She parked in front of the small gray house at the edge of Larkspur Avenue. A chain-link fence framed a narrow yard scattered with overgrown wildflowers and empty clay pots. The house itself was modest, only one bedroom, with a tin roof that rang in the rain and a small porch with wind chimes that had rusted quiet. Inside, the living room doubled as a studio. A pottery wheel stood by the window, its foot pedal worn from years of use. Shelves lined the walls, holding vases in all states of completion, some pristine, others cracked and abandoned mid-form. The scent of kiln-dried earth hung in the air. A fireplace sat cold and unused in the corner, and a folded army blanket waited near the door. Rosalind laid the blanket out beneath the porch overhang and placed a bowl of water beside it. The dog remained outside, sitting just beneath the eaves, letting the rain dampen his fur. He didn't enter the house, not even when she opened the door wide. She watched him for a moment, then said softly, "You don't have to come in yet. But you're safe now. That's all you need to know." He gave no response. She turned back inside and closed the door halfway. Through the glass she could still see him, a huddled golden shape beneath the storm. That night she couldn't sleep. Not that she ever truly did. She sat at the edge of her bed, a steaming mug of tea turning cold in her hands, her thoughts drifting into spaces she didn't often allow herself to revisit. Out there, beneath the relentless Oregon rain, was a dog no one wanted, a dog with scars, a dog who had once, perhaps, belonged to someone who hadn't deserved him. And she, too, had once belonged to a world that hadn't known what to do with her when she came back broken. She stood and opened the front door. The rain hit her face, cool and sharp. The dog looked up. Their eyes met for the first time, truly met. And in that instant she saw it. Not fear, not violence, but a quiet, heavy grief, the kind she knew well. She whispered, "I think I'll call you Echo." The dog blinked slowly. He didn't move, but his ears twitched. That was enough. The rain had softened, no longer a storm, but a quiet sadness falling from the sky in fine threads. Rosalind stood barefoot on the porch, mug of lukewarm coffee cupped in both hands, watching the golden shape curl just beneath the overhang. The dog had not moved since the first night. He lay in the same position, his back to the door, ears flicking only when a bird startled or a car passed in the distance. The army blanket beneath him was damp but untouched, and though the bowl of food beside it slowly emptied, he never ate while anyone was watching. She had called him Echo, not in ceremony, not as a command, but as a whisper. The name had come to her as she stood in the doorway, watching him refuse to come in out of the rain. She said it once, softly, and then again, and each time silence answered. It felt right, like naming a memory you weren't sure you were allowed to keep. It had been 3 days, and still, Echo hadn't crossed the threshold. Rosalind hadn't pushed. She had lived long enough to know what silence meant, how sometimes the body stayed still while the soul pressed itself against some invisible wall, unsure whether stepping forward would mean safety or collapse. So, she stayed with him. Every night she wrapped herself in an old quilt and sat against the wooden post at the corner of the porch, letting the chill of Oregon spring seep into her bones without complaint. Sometimes she talked. Not much. Just a few lines about the river, the kiln, the taste of chamomile tea. She didn't expect answers. On the third night, the rain returned. Not heavy, but steady. And cold. Echo remained curled in his usual spot, his fur darker now from being constantly wet, his ribs still too sharp against his sides. Rosalind shifted in her half-sleep, rolling slightly toward him. Her hand brushed his side, right over the scar. It happened in a blink. The dog sprang up, not to attack, but to escape. His paw struck her forearm, claws catching skin. She gasped, stumbling back, her elbow hitting the porch post with a dull crack. Echo crouched near the steps, eyes wide, tail tucked, body tense as a bow. His chest rose and fell in sharp, panicked bursts. For a second, He wasn't on the porch. He was somewhere else, somewhere far worse. Blood dripped from her sleeve. She didn't move toward him, didn't speak. Instead, she stood slowly, stepped inside, and returned a few minutes later with warm water, antiseptic, and a white towel. She sat cross-legged near the door, where the light from inside spilled just enough to see. With calm, practiced movements, she cleaned the wound on her arm, wrapped it tightly, and left the towel on the floor between them. Not as an offering, not as a threat, but as a simple fact. I'm still here. Echo didn't come closer, but he didn't run. The next morning, the rain lightened to a soft mist. The clouds hung low, brushing the tops of the trees. The willow in the backyard shimmered with droplets, its long branches swaying like hands reaching toward the earth. Rosalind opened the front door and stepped out. Echo was already awake, eyes open, head raised. His gaze met hers for just a second. Then he turned back toward the yard. At 10 a.m., a small voice called out from the gate. "Morning, Miss Hart!" Mildred Jarvis was a retired school teacher in her 70s, with a sharp mind and a wardrobe that had not changed since 1983. She wore a heavy blue raincoat with embroidered roses on the sleeves and mismatched rubber boots. Her silver hair was twisted into a braid that looped around her head like a crown, and her hands were covered in gardening gloves, even though she wasn't gardening. She lived 2 doors down and had been watching Rosalind for years with the kind of neighborly concern that came not from nosiness, but from old-fashioned maternal instinct. "I brought banana bread," she announced, holding up a foil-wrapped bundle. "No walnuts. You always hated them." Rosalind gave a small, genuine smile. "You remembered." "I remember everything. Come on, let me see you. You look thinner than last winter." Mildred stepped onto the porch, peering over Rosalind's shoulder. Her gaze landed on the golden figure curled up by the steps. Her face softened, then shifted with something more cautious. "So this is the mutt from the auction," she said, her tone half warm, half wary. "Lord, he looks haunted." "He's recovering," Rosalind replied quietly. "I hope you are too," Mildred added, eyeing the bandage peeking from under Rosalind's sleeve. "That from him?" "It was an accident. He panicked." Mildred sighed and leaned against the porch railing. "I had a dog once, back when my husband came home from Korea. Shepherd mix. Wouldn't go through doorways. Wouldn't let anyone touch his collar. Sat all night staring at walls. War changes dogs, just like it changes people. They don't tell you that, but it's true." Rosalind nodded, looking out toward the willow tree. Mildred followed her gaze. "If he doesn't come in soon, he's going to get sick. Pneumonia doesn't care about trauma." "I leave the door open." "That's all you can do, I guess." Mildred patted her on the shoulder gently. "Just don't let silence trick you into thinking this is all you deserve." After she left, Rosalind sat beneath the willow tree for the first time since autumn. The earth was cold and damp, but she didn't mind. She brought a sketch pad with her and drew without looking at the page. Her pencil moved in slow, deliberate lines, shapes forming not from vision, but from memory. A soft rustling made her look up. Echo stood at the edge of the porch, his body rigid, tail low, one paw lifted mid-step. He stared at her, head tilted slightly. She didn't speak. She didn't move. After a moment, he stepped off the porch, walked across the wet grass, stopped 2 feet from her, and lay down. Not beside her. Not close enough for touch, but facing the same direction, beneath the same willow branches. It was his way of saying, "I see you. I'm still afraid, but I'm trying." Rosalind didn't cry. She just closed her sketchbook and let the rain fall through the willow leaves onto her hands. The following morning dawned pale and brittle, with thin sunlight slipping through the willow branches like hesitant fingers. Rosalind stood in the kitchen, pouring hot water over crushed lavender and chamomile. Her right arm, still wrapped from the night Echo had panicked, throbbed with a dull ache, though she barely noticed anymore. She looked out the window, where the dog sat quietly in the yard, not close, not far. It had been 5 days since she brought him home. He hadn't barked once. Rosalind knew waiting wasn't enough. Healing didn't always come from time. It needed understanding. That's what brought her to the dusty business card tucked beneath a magnet on her fridge. She'd been given it months ago by Mildred, who mentioned the man when her own cat developed arthritis. "He's not your regular vet," Mildred had said. "He sees the ghosts no one talks about." Dr. Lennox Reyes was a name Rosalind remembered from whispers in town. a Cuban-born veterinarian in his early 50s with a thick silver beard and eyes like melted obsidian. He stood about 6 feet tall, with a heavy-set build and long, careful fingers made for both surgery and comfort. He had once served as a military medic in the Gulf, retired after 2 tours, 1 back surgery, and 1 near-death experience. Since then, he'd opened a small private practice near the north end of town, a converted greenhouse surrounded by ivy, wind chimes, and the quiet hum of wind through the trees. Rosalind didn't call ahead. She just loaded Echo into the back of her truck, this time with a little less coaxing, and drove with the windows slightly cracked so the air could move. The clinic was quiet. No barking, no waiting room chaos. Just the creak of wood beneath her boots as she stepped into the long glass hallway that led to the main office. Potted plants lined the edges, and somewhere in the distance, birds chirped like it was spring somewhere else. Dr. Reyes appeared from a side door, wiping his hands on a towel. He wore navy scrubs under a tan lab coat, and his salt and pepper curls were pulled back with a leather tie. He smiled faintly as he saw her. "Miss Hart," he said, voice deep and rich with an accent that curled around his vowels. "You're early. You remember me? You bought that raku-fired urn from the gallery last year. Said it reminded you of a ship hull." He glanced past her to the door. "And this must be Echo." Rosalind gave a small nod. "He hasn't been touched by anyone since I got him, including me." Dr. Reyes's expression softened. "Then, we'll move carefully." But the moment they entered the exam room, Echo changed. The golden retriever froze, nose twitching violently, ears pressed tight against his skull. His paws skidded on the tile as he backed into the corner, then crouched, growling low and constant. It wasn't rage, it was terror, pure and physical. Reyes stepped back, palms open. "That's not a defensive growl, that's history talking." Rosalind stayed still near the door. "He's never reacted like this before, not even when I brought him home." "Because this isn't home," Reyes said gently. "This smells like metal, like antiseptic, like every place where bad things happened." They waited. 5 minutes, then 10. Eventually, Reyes lowered himself onto a stool and began speaking softly, not to Rosalind, but to Echo, in Spanish at first, then English, words without meaning. Just rhythm, just presence. Echo didn't relax, but his growl subsided into a steady panting. "I've seen this before," Reyes murmured, "in dogs trained for high-risk missions, especially when they break protocol and get punished for it." Rosalind looked up. "You think he was military?" "I think he was something worse." Reyes pulled a handheld scanner from the cabinet, barely lifting it from the shelf. "May I?" Rosalind nodded. Carefully, Reyes inched closer, not standing, not looming. He held the scanner like it was made of porcelain and waved it from a distance across Echo's body. Nothing at first. Then, as he hovered near the dog's neck, the scanner beeped faintly. Then again, louder. Echo flinched, growled again, and pressed harder against the corner. Reyes stopped. "That's not a standard ID chip," he said. "Too deep, too far back, and wrong frequency." He turned to Rosalind. "Would you mind waiting outside for a moment?" She hesitated. "He's reading your tension. He needs less of it." She stepped out into the hall and sat on the bench beneath a sun-bleached photograph of a search and rescue dog in action. Her hands shook, and she clenched them between her knees. 15 minutes passed. When Reyes emerged, his expression was tight. "I didn't sedate him," he said quickly, "but I did get a closer look. There's a fragment, metal, maybe titanium, just under the skin near the base of the skull. It's not chipped like civilian ID. It looks like a tracker, but damaged, intentionally. Can it be removed?" "Yes, but not today. Not without sedation and a surgical setup. He's already in survival mode. Any more intrusion would break him." Rosalind pressed a hand to her forehead. "So he's not just a stray." "No," Reyes said. "He's more like repurposed equipment, discarded when no longer useful." Something shifted behind Rosalind's ribs. A memory, not of war, but of walking off the base the day she was discharged, her arm in a sling, her backpack light, her name no longer echoing in any system that cared. "Do you want to know what they call dogs like him in the system?" Reyes asked quietly. She nodded. "Assets." Rosalind stood, her voice low. "Then he's not an asset anymore." Reyes watched her as she returned to the door. "Bring him back in a week," he said. We'll see what we can do. And Rosalind, thank you for not giving up. Back home, Echo didn't retreat to the porch. He lay beside the willow tree again as the afternoon sun slipped past clouds and painted the grass in gold. His breathing was shallow, but calm. That night, when Rosalind opened the door and left it ajar, he didn't hesitate. He stepped inside, only a few feet, but it was his choice. The morning air was crisp, brittle with leftover frost clinging to the porch rails. Rosalind stepped outside with a thermos of coffee in one hand and her sketchbook in the other, boots crunching softly over gravel. The willow tree glistened from the night's dew, and just beneath it, Echo lay watching the sun creep slowly over the rooftops, his fur catching gold in the light. He had begun to shift in small ways, eating while she was present, curling slightly closer at night, resting his head on the doorway threshold, as if debating each evening whether the house was truly his. It had been 4 days since the visit to Dr. Reyes. Rosalind had kept her routine unchanged, speaking less, observing more. She didn't rush trust. She understood it needed soil and time to grow. That afternoon, the phone rang. Dr. Reyes's voice was calm, but carried a new undercurrent, a quiet urgency. "I've found something," he said. "I'd like you to come in." Rosalind arrived at the clinic 20 minutes later. Echo rode in the back seat, calmer now, his body no longer trembling with every turn. He didn't enter the clinic building, but he didn't resist being close to it. That, too, was a sign of progress. Inside, Reyes sat at his desk, surrounded by yellowing folders and a laptop that looked too new for the rest of the room. The sunlight coming through the greenhouse-style windows glinted off his wire-rimmed glasses as he leaned back, tapping one folder with his index finger. "You said the fragment embedded under Echo's skin wasn't just a chip. I ran the serial patterns through a contact, unofficially. Someone I used to serve with. They pulled it from archived military records, not the public-facing system, the buried one." Rosalind leaned forward, and Reyes opened the file. Inside were photocopied documents with redacted lines and blurred stamps. He slid one forward. A deployment photo. A team of soldiers in desert gear, standing in a line. In the front, tongue lolling, posture perfect, stood a younger version of Echo, muscles leaner, coat fuller, eyes brighter. He was registered as K9 Unit Hash RZ048, codename Rex. Served in Special Forces operations, 3 tours in the Middle East. He was listed as a high-value tactical asset with confirmed engagements in urban extraction missions. Rosalind looked at the photo again. She could barely match it to the dog who now followed her shadow. "Why haven't I heard of him?" she asked. "That's where it gets strange." Reyes flipped to the next page. After his 3rd deployment, there's a 6-month gap. No location, no handler reports, no training updates. Then his file ends completely. Status: removed from active service due to behavioral failure. No transfer, no adoption order, just gone. Rosalind frowned. "And the scar? The chip?" Reyes hesitated. "These suggest he wasn't discharged. He was decommissioned, like hardware." She exhaled slowly. "So who had him last?" Reyes pushed a final document across the desk. It was a personnel file, more redacted lines than readable ones, but one name was visible: Colonel Warren Vexley. "He was the last confirmed handler," Reyes said. "He ran an enhanced training unit within the K9 program. Unorthodox methods, accelerated schedules, rumors of psychological conditioning through stress exposure, punishment-based obedience drills. The military shut down his unit quietly 3 years ago, but not before several dogs went missing from records." Rosalind scanned the page. "And now?" "Private sector," Reyes said bitterly. "He runs a high-level security company called Iron Gate Tactical. Contracts with overseas firms, private governments, still trains dogs, still uses his old methods, and no one's watching." A silence stretched between them. The only sound was the ticking of a clock shaped like a dog paw above the cabinet. "So Echo, Rex, was one of his dogs." Reyes nodded. "Possibly his last." Outside, the wind picked up. Rosalind stared at the page. In her chest, something old stirred. Not just anger, but a soldier's instinct. She had seen men like Vexley before. Men who believed breaking a thing made it stronger. Men who were protected by paperwork and distance. Men who never looked the creature in the eyes after the damage was done. "He's not Rex anymore," she said quietly. Reyes looked up. He's Echo, and he's mine. That night, back at the house, Rosalind sat on the porch steps, Echo beside her, his chin resting on his front paws. She didn't bring it up to him, didn't speak the name Vexley or Rex, but as she ran her hand lightly down his back, not over the scar, his tail gave a slow, tentative wag. Just once, as if he too had chosen to forget the old name. The rain returned with a vengeance that night, slamming against the windows of Rosalind's cottage in waves, bending the willow's branches until they touched the ground like penitent hands. The clouds above Portland rolled black and electric, coiling with thunder that rattled the panes in their frames. Inside the house, the lights flickered as Rosalind set a bowl of stew on the small table near the fireplace. Echo lay curled on the rug across the room, head resting on his paws, eyes half-lidded but watchful. She had started reading aloud in the evenings. Not anything particular, just whatever was nearby. Sometimes an old poetry book, sometimes newsprint left behind at the market. Her voice was low and steady, and while Echo never moved closer, he never moved away either. That was progress. But then the first lightning bolt struck, so close it turned the windows white for a blink, and the world inside the house changed. Echo was up before the thunderclap even came, his body rigid, eyes wild. When the sound hit, rolling and violent, he bolted. "Echo!" Rosalind called, too late. He shot through the door she'd forgotten to latch, out into the storm. She stumbled after him, grabbing only a coat and flashlight as she ran barefoot across the slick grass. The sky cracked again above her, lightning splitting open the night like a jagged wound. Her breath hitched with the cold, her heart pounding not from exertion, but from something older. Something that still lived in her bones, in the part of her that had once flinched under mortar blasts. The wind slapped rain into her face as she reached the gate. "Echo!" she shouted, voice swallowed by thunder. "Echo! Come back!" No answer. She checked the side street. Nothing. The alleys behind the butcher shop. Still nothing. Her flashlight's beam cut through falling sheets of water, illuminating only dumpsters and broken crates. Then, in a narrow back lane lined with garbage bins and rotting cardboard, she saw him. Echo stood wedged between a broken pallet and the cinder block wall, soaking, shaking, eyes wild with something more than fear. His entire body trembled with the old panic. Panic that didn't belong to the moment, but to a memory. His mouth opened slightly in shallow, soundless gasps. He didn't notice her at first. Rosalind didn't speak. She crouched in the middle of the alley, rain soaking her jeans, pooling around her boots. Her flashlight dropped beside her, casting its beam sideways, dim and indirect. She wrapped her arms around her knees and stared forward. Not at Echo, but at the puddle forming between them. For a long time, neither moved. Then, softly, she began to speak. "I used to dream about water," she said. "Endless water. Gray and cold and full of voices that didn't belong to anyone. I'd wake up gasping every night for a year. People thought it was from the explosion, but it started long before that. It started the day I came home and didn't recognize the sound of my own name." A low rumble of thunder passed through the sky. "You're not crazy," she said, "and you're not broken." She didn't move toward him. She didn't extend her hand. "I can't fix what happened to you, and you can't fix what happened to me. But maybe," her voice cracked, "maybe we don't need to fix anything. Maybe we just need to sit here in the rain until it stops mattering." Echo shifted, his paws twitching in the shallow mud. His breathing slowed. Then, barely perceptible, he took a step forward. Just one. He stopped again, lowered his head, and stared at her. Not through her, not past her, at her. Rosalind's eyes stung, not from the rain. She didn't blink. Echo stepped again, then again. When he reached her, he didn't lean in. He didn't press close or lick her face, but he stood beside her, inches away, shaking but standing. And he stayed. She didn't say anything else. She let the storm rage around them, let it wash away the night and the past and the name he no longer carried. By the time they returned home, the thunder had faded to a distant mutter. The power had gone out. Candles flickered inside the small house, and the fire in the hearth had long gone cold. But it didn't matter. Echo followed her in. When she laid the blanket on the floor, he curled beside it. Not on it, but close enough to mean something. That night, Rosalind didn't sleep in her bed. She slept on the floor, not touching, but beside him. and for the first time, he didn't flinch when she closed her eyes. The fog clung low over Portland that morning, wrapping the neighborhood in a thin veil of quiet unease. Rosalind stood on the porch, coffee in hand, while Echo lay sprawled just beside the threshold, his head resting on crossed paws, ears twitching at every creak of the wind. The previous night's storm had passed, but its memory still lingered in the puddles glinting along the curb and the heavy charged silence between gusts. She was just about to go inside when the low rumble of tires pulled her attention to the street. A black SUV, sleek and unfamiliar, rolled slowly down Larkspur Avenue and came to a smooth stop in front of her house. The windows were tinted too dark to see through, but the polished sheen of the vehicle and its silent engine suggested purpose. Rosalind's shoulders tightened. A moment later, the front doors opened in near unison. Two men stepped out, both dressed in dark jackets and pressed slacks, the kind that didn't wrinkle even after hours of sitting. One was tall and broad-shouldered, his salt and pepper hair slicked back, the lines around his mouth etched with precision. The other was lean, younger, with sharp blue eyes and a clipboard tucked under one arm. "Miss Hart?" the older man asked, approaching with practiced calm. Rosalind didn't answer immediately. She stood still, letting Echo rise slowly and move to her side. His body was alert but not aggressive. Head raised, muscles poised beneath his golden coat like coiled tension. She rested a hand lightly on his back. "Yes," she finally said. The younger man smiled thinly. "We represent a private firm interested in acquiring trained canines for specialized assignments. We were told you recently came into possession of one with unique capabilities." Rosalind's eyes narrowed. "He's not for sale." "You might reconsider," the older man said, reaching into his jacket and pulling out a folded envelope. "We're prepared to offer a substantial sum. Enough to improve your property, maybe reopen that kiln full time." She didn't look at the envelope. "You don't know him." "On the contrary," the younger man said, his smile fading. "We know exactly what he is, and what he's capable of." Echo took a step forward, low growl building in his throat. Rosalind didn't stop him. "I suggest you leave," she said. The men exchanged a glance. Then, without another word, they turned, got into the SUV, and drove away. But Rosalind watched them until the vehicle disappeared completely around the bend. That night, she locked every window and reinforced the back door. The unease had burrowed in deeper than she wanted to admit. Echo paced restlessly, ears flicking toward every creak and shifting shadow. It was past midnight when she heard the sound, a subtle clink, like metal brushing metal, followed by the creak of the back gate. Echo was on his feet before she could stand, his body low, tail stiff, every muscle primed. Rosalind grabbed the flashlight and moved quietly to the window. Outside, beneath the willow's shadow, a figure slipped between the hedges. She couldn't make out a face, just the glint of something in his hand. Then came the soft pop of a window sliding open. Before she could move, Echo was already leaping through the door, his growl cutting through the silence like a warning shot. There was a brief scuffle outside, shuffling feet, a yelp, the crashing sound of someone tripping over the flower pots. Rosalind ran to the porch in time to see the figure vault the fence and disappear into the night. Echo stopped at the edge of the yard, panting hard, his body trembling but upright. She crouched beside him, hands on his shoulders, whispering words she couldn't hear over the pounding in her own chest. They didn't sleep that night. By sunrise, the police had come and gone, polite, indifferent, noting there was no damage, no theft, no real threat. They filed a report but offered little else. Rosalind didn't care. She took Echo to Dr. Reyes that afternoon. The vet examined the dog with more gentleness than usual, noting the fresh scratches on Echo's side, the tension still tight in his limbs. "It's remarkable," Reyes said softly, checking his eyes. "He's still afraid, but last night, he chose to stay." Rosalind nodded. "They knew who he was. They didn't want a dog. They wanted him back." Reyes frowned. "Then it's time we took a closer look." He ran a new scan, adjusting the frequency manually, eyes narrowing as the scanner lit up once more at Echo's neck. "There's something embedded deeper than we thought," he muttered. "Possibly a two-part chip. The visible portion's been deactivated, but the core is military issue, encrypted and durable. They were likely tracking him long after his last mission. But the signal's dead now." "Can it be removed?" "With precision, yes. But it's going to take more than just sedation and a scalpel." That chip wasn't meant to come out. Rosalind looked at Echo, who was watching her silently from the examination table, chest rising slowly, ears relaxed for once. "We'll do it," she said. Reyes nodded. "I'll prep for surgery. In the meantime, stay alert. Whoever came last night won't give up that easily." The first chill of autumn arrived early that year, curling through the trees like breath and brushing gold against the edges of Portland's rooftops. Rosalind stood on her porch, arms folded against her chest, watching Echo as he trotted across the yard. Slower than before, a bit stiff from the healing wound where Dr. Reyes had carefully removed the embedded chip 2 days prior. The procedure had been delicate, the incision clean, but Rosalind could still see the discomfort in the way Echo turned his neck, cautious, as if afraid of what might still be under his skin. Inside her house, the television murmured low, a news channel, background noise, until a name caught her ear. Allegations surrounding Iron Gate Tactical's animal training program. She turned, volume up. A young woman appeared on the screen, framed by a chain-link fence and stacks of sealed crates stamped "military surplus." She was speaking quickly but clearly, the kind of voice made for deadlines and early broadcasts. Beneath her, the headline scrolled, "Investigative journalist probes dark history behind military K-9 division." Her name was Mina Caldwell, and she was just 24, still fresh in the field, though her eyes had already learned how to carry weariness. She was slender, barely 5'5", with a mop of dark curls she constantly tucked behind one ear during interviews. Her tone was intense, professional, but never cold. She came from Detroit, raised in foster homes, bounced through systems, and had carved her way into journalism with the tenacity of someone who'd grown up needing to prove she mattered. Mina had been following the Echo story since whispers began to circulate online about the black SUV, the failed break-in, and the surgically removed tracking chip. What had begun as a footnote in a local police report had unraveled into something larger, much larger. 2 weeks earlier, Mina had interviewed an ex-handler from a shuttered canine training facility in Arizona. The man refused to go on camera, but his words were damning. Dogs that started showing independent behavior, flinching at commands, refusing to enter buildings after an op. They were labeled defective, shipped out, no follow-up, no rehoming, just gone. The phrase haunted Mina. Just gone. Digging deeper, she requested redacted military files under the Freedom of Information Act. The names of 10 dogs surfaced, some listed deceased, others transferred, but with no adoption trail. Their missions, their handlers, their records, all showed the same patterns: exposure to combat, signs of psychological distress, then sudden disappearance. And then came the name RZ048, codenamed Rex. The file was scrubbed, missing entire pages, but it had one unaltered line: handler, Colonel Warren Vexley. The deeper she went, the darker it became. In a last-ditch effort to confirm whether Rex, the same dog now known as Echo, had in fact survived, Mina reached out to someone listed in an old deployment report, a private contact who had never spoken publicly, a man whose name appeared alongside Rex's during a joint operation in Kandahar. Travis Henson, age 37, ex-Army corporal. She found him in southern Washington, where he lived alone on the edge of a state park in a small cabin made of red cedar. He was tall, rough cut, with the stoic bearing of someone who had spent years trying to silence noise that wouldn't leave. His beard was patchy, his eyes sunken, but there was strength in how he held himself. He had a permanent limp in his right leg and wore the kind of expression that suggested trust was rationed out like cigarettes in the desert. At first he refused to speak, but when Mina showed him the photo, Echo standing in the alley behind Rosalind's house, soaked and trembling from the storm, something shifted in him. "That's him," Travis murmured. "That's Rex." "You're sure?" He didn't blink. He pulled me out of a blown convoy, took shrapnel to his flank and kept going, carried the scent trail over 2 miles through insurgent lines to get me back. I was unconscious the whole time. Travis stood and walked to a small wooden box in the corner of the room. He pulled out a laminated card, the kind handlers sometimes made unofficially for morale. On it was a photograph. Rex, at full attention, sitting beside a younger, smiling Travis in desert gear. "He saved my life," Travis said, "and they erased him like a piece of hardware that malfunctioned." "Why didn't you come forward before?" Mina asked gently. Travis looked away. Because I was scared. Because Vexley's people made it clear. Talk, and you lose your benefits, your access, your peace. But now, he looked at her again. Now I've seen what they did to him, and I won't stay silent. That night, Mina posted the story. Not just the interview, but the files, the photo, the quotes from unnamed handlers, and the list of the just gone dogs. It spread like oil fire across forums, vet networks, and news aggregates. People who had served with K9 units began speaking up. Others started checking for chips in their adopted dogs. The story had found its legs. And at the center of it all was a single dog, Echo. Rosalind saw the story the next morning. She sat on her porch, Echo lying beside her, both of them still in the slow rhythm of healing. She turned the laptop to face him. The screen showed his old self, leaner, upright, burning with duty. And next to that, a new photo Mina had taken. Him beside Rosalind, head tilted gently, finally at ease. She rested her hand on his neck. "You're not a ghost anymore," she whispered. "They can't hide you now." The sky above the Oregon hills was a dirty bronze by dusk, the kind of color that felt like warning. The air was dry, windless, too quiet. Rosalind adjusted the strap of her backpack and crouched behind the rusted shell of an abandoned hay trailer, just outside the barbed wire perimeter of what had once been a rural agricultural training center. Now it was something else entirely, a place hidden under the false banner of Canine Tactical Advancement, run by men in clean boots who never got dirt on their hands. Beside her, Echo lay flat, eyes forward, ears twitching. His breathing was slow, steady, quiet, but alert. Gone was the trembling creature from weeks before. What crouched beside her now was a soldier, remembering how to be whole. Behind them moved the rest of the team. Mina Caldwell, dressed in dark jeans, an oversized hoodie, and a low ponytail tucked into a cap, adjusted the GoPro strapped across her chest. Her face was tight with resolve. This was no longer a story. It was a reckoning. Dr. Lennox Reyes, uncharacteristically out of scrubs and in a worn brown jacket, carried a compact medical kit and a sidearm he had once sworn he would never touch again. His shoulders were broader than they looked behind a clinic counter, and his voice was low when he spoke, barely louder than the breeze. 2 guards by the main gate, more near the loading dock, probably armed. The fourth figure was Grant Hollander, a retired Army Ranger in his late 40s, with a jaw like stone and a haunted silence to his gait. His beard was flecked with gray, his knuckles marked by the kinds of scars that didn't need explanation. He had served with Vexley years ago, briefly, and had left the military the moment he saw what the man was building. Now he led them through the terrain with the precision of a ghost slipping between trees. They waited until full dark. The camp buzzed with the illusion of professionalism. Floodlights along the gravel paths, fake ID signs hung on newly painted walls, handlers in tactical gear walking large German shepherds and Belgian Malinois up and down lines of cones. From a distance, it looked impressive, clean, modern. But past the main building, behind a set of chain-linked fences covered in tarp, the truth was sleeping, drugged, silenced, and forgotten. They made it through a cut in the fence, crawled past the kennels, and slipped into the back corridor of the holding area. The moment they entered the building, Echo stiffened. A low whine escaped him, barely audible. "What is it?" Rosalind asked, crouching beside him. His eyes were fixed on the rows of steel crates just beyond the far wall. They followed him. Inside the room, there were 27 crates, stacked in rows, each with a number, no names. Most of the dogs inside were unconscious, their bodies limp, sides rising and falling in uneven patterns. IV bags hung lazily from crooked metal stands, dripping chemicals into veins that once pulsed with instinct. Reyes checked a label. Benzodiazepines, heavy, enough to keep them barely responsive. "They're not training these dogs," Mina whispered. "They're erasing them." Rosalind crouched beside one of the crates, her breath catching. A young golden retriever, barely a year old, was curled in a tight, trembling ball inside. Its coat was dulled by grime, eyes half closed, body wrapped in a harness laced with shock modules. There was blood around the front paw where it had chewed at its own bindings. Echo stepped forward, ears high, tail still. His eyes met the pup's, and something happened. The young retriever blinked slowly. Its tail, barely twitching, moved once against the metal floor. Echo pressed his forehead lightly against the bars and let out a soft, broken sound. Something between a growl and a whimper. Recognition passed between them. Rosalind whispered, "He knows him." Reyes pried open the crate's lock with a small crowbar, his hands careful. As the door swung open, the pup flinched but didn't run. Echo stepped forward and sat, tail curled. The young dog, shivering, slowly crawled toward him and collapsed against Echo's side. "We need to get them both out now," Hollander said. "Someone's going to notice we're offline." They moved quickly, Reyes working down the line of crates, marking ear tags, snapping photos. Mina recorded everything. Every bruised paw, every sedated eye. Outside, tires crunched over gravel. Voices called out, "Too close." "We're out of time," Grant muttered. "They're checking the kennels." Rosalind wrapped the pup in her jacket, hoisting him against her chest. The little retriever didn't struggle. He just lay there, dazed, but breathing. "His name's Cinder," she said softly, almost to herself. "From the ashes." They slipped back out the fence as spotlights began sweeping the compound. Minutes later, an alarm went off. But by then, the team was gone, disappearing into the forest line, feet light over fallen leaves. Echo trotted beside Rosalind the whole way back, never looking back, never breaking pace. Beside him, cradled in her arms, Cinder slept. Alive, barely, but alive. The winds rolled down from Mount Hood like warnings carved into air. The pine trees around the ranch groaned with each gust, as if whispering of what was coming. The early light was fractured, pale behind clouds. Rosalind stood at the edge of her porch, a thermal mug in hand, her gaze scanning the long dirt road that led into the property. She'd taken to wearing her navy fatigue jacket again, an old reflex she hadn't thought she'd ever need. The fabric was faded now, but it still carried the weight of readiness. Inside, Echo and Cinder lay side by side. Echo was quiet but alert, his head resting on his front paws, ears pivoting with every sound. Cinder, the young golden retriever they had rescued days earlier, was slowly recovering. He was no longer sedated, but the tremble still lived in his limbs. He was smaller than Echo by half, with light honey fur and eyes that looked older than they should. He followed Echo everywhere now, copying his posture, mirroring his movement, like a child learning again how to belong to the world. Dr. Reyes had been coming by twice daily to check on Cinder. The last visit, he'd said the pup would pull through. "He's lucky," Reyes had murmured, adjusting the bandages on Cinder's leg. "Lucky he saw Echo first, and not the world." But luck, Rosalind knew, was fragile. That morning just after sunrise, Mina called. Her voice was tight, words clipped. "They know we were there, and they're coming." Rosalind didn't need to ask who. Mina had been tipped off by an anonymous email, untraceable, no header, no signature. Just a message that read, "He's done hiding. You should too." By noon, the ranch was a fortress. Grant Hollander returned, bringing with him 2 other veterans. Luis Ortega, a quiet former Navy tech specialist with keen eyes and quicker fingers, and Carmen Doyle, a wiry ex-Marine sniper with a dry sense of humor and a long scar down the left side of her jaw from a mission she never talked about. They didn't ask questions, they simply nodded, unpacked their gear, and took positions. Rosalind prepared too, not by building barricades or stacking ammo, but by making Echo understand. She knelt before him in the gravel, placed both hands on his neck gently and said, "No more hiding. If they come, we don't run." Echo didn't look away. That afternoon, the black SUV returned, but this time, it didn't stop at the gate. It rolled through. 2 more vehicles followed, unmarked, heavy-tired, with men in dark tactical gear climbing out before the engines had even settled. They didn't have badges, didn't announce themselves, and they weren't here to talk. The first man reached for the door latch. He didn't get far. Echo was already moving. He launched across the yard with a ferocity none of them had seen before. Not rage, not wildness, but precision. He placed himself between Rosalind and the nearest man, teeth bared, muscles flexed, tail rigid with alertness. A deep, vibrating growl shook from his chest. Not fear, not warning, but command. The man hesitated. That was all the time Carmen needed. From the ridge, she gave a single warning shot, clean into the dirt inches from the man's boot. Next one goes higher, she called. Calm, almost cheerful. Rosalind stepped forward, voice clear. This is private property. I suggest you leave. The lead man smirked. We're not here for you, Miss Hart. Then you're here for him, she said, motioning to Echo, which makes it my problem. Behind her, Cinder appeared at the door, tail low, body shaking, but he stood, not behind Echo, beside him. The standoff held for seconds that felt like minutes. Then, sirens. Not local, federal. FBI SUVs pulled up behind the unmarked convoy. The door to the lead vehicle opened, and out stepped Special Agent Danny Mercer, a woman in her mid-30s with sharp cheekbones, short blonde hair, and a blazer that moved like armor. She had the voice of someone who'd been fighting to be heard in a room full of shouting men her entire career, and had finally learned to shout louder. She held up her badge. Step away from the animals, she said coolly. This property and its residents are now under federal protection. The armed men exchanged looks, then backed off. Reluctantly, teeth clenched. Within the hour, Vexley was in custody. Agent Mercer had been tracking him for months, her team quietly gathering data in the shadows of bureaucratic obstruction. But the video footage from the camp, the veterinary scans, the ear tag logs from the sedated dogs, everything Mina, Reyes, and Rosalind had collected had finally forced the Justice Department's hand. Later that evening, as the sun dipped behind Mount Hood, Echo sat on the porch with Rosalind again. No leash, no fear, just presence. The news broke across Oregon the next morning. Footage of Echo's growl, Cinder's defiant stand, the masked men backing away. It all played out in slow motion on every screen. Mina's story aired nationally. The term, the dog who wouldn't run, started trending. Local schools painted murals. A bakery named a cinnamon roll after him. Reyes got over 200 calls from vet clinics asking how they could help retired K9S. And at the center of it all was Echo, no longer hiding in the shadows of a porch, but standing in the light of a story reclaimed. The rain returned, not as a storm this time, but as something gentler, persistent, soft, cleansing. It fell over the pines lining the outskirts of Portland and trickled down the moss-covered stones leading up to the newly built sanctuary just off the Willamette River. The sign outside was simple, hand-carved from cedar, The Haven. A second chance for warriors. Below it, etched in delicate lines, was a silhouette of a dog sitting tall beneath a willow tree. Inside the sanctuary's main building, the scent of warm hay, cedar wood, and damp earth mingled with the soft padding of paws on polished concrete. The wide training hall, repurposed from an old barn, echoed with cautious movement. Dogs of all sizes, some with scars, others with cloudy eyes, each making their way down corridors with a quiet bravery. Many had been through deployments, kennels, tests, trauma, and had returned broken. But here, they were not alone, and neither was Echo. Now 10 years old, Echo walked slower than before. His muzzle had silvered with age, and the small scar where the chip had once been embedded beneath his neck was almost invisible. But his posture remained proud, and his eyes, clear, steady, still held the quiet force of a survivor. He was no longer a dog hiding beneath porches or flinching at thunder. He had become something else entirely, a symbol, a mentor, a guardian. Every morning he greeted new arrivals at the sanctuary gates. He didn't bark. He didn't approach unless invited. He simply stood, still and calm, as the others hesitated, sniffed, shook, and trembled in their uncertainty. And more often than not, within moments, the tension in their bodies would ease. Cinder had grown into a strong, lean retriever of 2 years, always trailing behind Echo, his steps lighter, his tail higher. Though his trauma had left him with a slight limp and an aversion to loud metal doors, he had become Echo's unofficial shadow, learning through presence, not command. Rosalind walked the sanctuary grounds daily. She had traded her solitary life at the Riverside Pottery Studio for this new mission. Her hands, once sculpting clay, now held leashes, wrapped bandages, and calmed frightened creatures with the same grace she once gave to her art. She still kept a wheel in the back room of the house, but now her sculptures bore the shape of paw prints, wind, and quiet resilience. On the first anniversary of Vexley's arrest, a small ceremony was held under the willow tree. Mina Caldwell stood at a podium fashioned from reclaimed barnwood. She had changed too, her curls tied back into a braid, her camera hung from her neck like a talisman. Her book, The Dog Who Waited in the Rain, had just been published. It was more than an expose. It was a memoir of survival and silence, of injustice and justice earned. She opened the speech with the story of that first thunderstorm, the night Echo didn't run. "I thought I was telling his story," she said, her voice clear over the rain. "But what I learned was that Echo was telling ours, the story of everyone who's ever been discarded after serving, every soul left behind, every warrior, human or not, who waited for someone to say, 'You matter still.'" In the front row sat Travis Henson, dressed in his old uniform. The stiffness in his leg was still there, but the bitterness in his face had faded. He came with a small wooden box, polished and simple, containing something that had taken years to reclaim. After Mina's speech, Travis stepped forward. He knelt beside Echo, opened the box, and pulled out a small bronze medal, its edges worn, ribbon navy blue. "This should have been yours years ago," he said, fastening it to Echo's collar with practiced care. "They never gave it to you, but that doesn't mean you didn't earn it." The medal was a distinguished service emblem, issued by a group of retired veterans who had lobbied to honor forgotten military animals. Echo wore it without fuss, without fanfare, just a quiet gaze toward the sky, as if remembering. Rosalind watched from a distance, hands in her pockets, rain clinging to her lashes. She thought about the first time she saw him, curled on a concrete floor, forgotten by everyone. And she thought about the nights they spent under the porch, neither sleeping, neither trusting. Now, there was a roof over both their heads, and a purpose that extended beyond their pain. After the ceremony, children ran between the kennels. One of them, Sadie Bell, a bright-eyed girl of 9 with a gap-toothed grin and a notebook full of dog sketches, stopped to sit beside Echo. She didn't pet him, just sat. Echo didn't move away. "He reminds me of Grandpa," she whispered to her father. "He's quiet, but knows things." The sanctuary grew slowly over the seasons. By the end of the year, the center had accepted 42 dogs from around the country, retrieved from failed programs, high-risk shelters, or private adoptions gone wrong. The team included volunteers, many of them veterans with PTSD or anxiety, who found in these dogs a mirror and a balm. They trained not with force, but with patience, not with control, but with trust. Echo led without words. His presence taught them what obedience could never demand: the art of stillness, the courage of presence, and the grace of not giving up. And in the evenings, when the rain came again, because in Portland it always did, Echo would lie beneath the willow tree, Cinder beside him, and watch as new arrivals were led inside. Some limped, some cowered, some barked too loud, but none were alone. Sometimes, healing doesn't arrive in loud miracles or shining lights. It comes in silence, in rain, in the quiet return of trust between a broken soul and a creature that never stopped believing. Echo's story reminds us that no matter how lost we feel, there is always a path back, not through force, but through love, patience, and the grace of second chances. It is no accident that Echo found Rosalind, nor that Cinder found Echo. In the most unexpected places, God sends us answers to prayers we didn't even know we whispered. Whether you believe in fate, faith, or divine purpose, it's hard to deny that something greater was at work, guiding these lives toward one another, turning pain into purpose. In our daily lives, we are surrounded by quiet battles, some seen, most not. There are people and animals among us carrying wounds that don't bleed, but still ache. May this story remind you to notice them, to sit beside them in the rain, and to believe always that no soul is beyond redemption. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment to let us know your thoughts, and if you believe that healing is possible through love, type Amen below. Subscribe to our channel for more stories of faith, courage, and the invisible threads that connect us. May God bless you and everyone you love.